Hello, Wednesday, August 13th. Welcome to another episode of the Mituye News. Per usual, we'll take a look at some of our favorite stories from today's newsletter. If you haven't yet, check out the Substack that really is the heart of the venture. We'll begin with one of our big global stories here, and we have some stuff going on in Europe. As we can see from this headline, far-right populists top polls in Germany, France, and Britain for the first time. So this is important. This represents some type of political shift, a significant one. Not only does this represent, a kind of shift in the political sentiment of Europeans in these countries, it also is representative of a shift in Europe's three biggest economies. So there's been populist movements recently in Europe and in many a country, but these are particularly significant because these are really important countries for Europe's health and success. So we'll get into it a little bit here. Let's see. For the first time in modern history, far-right and populist parties are simultaneously topping the polls in Europe's three main economies of Germany, France, and Britain. A poll Tuesday showed Alternative for Germany, which is under surveillance by the country's intelligence services over suspected extremism, is now the most favored by voters. The survey by broadcaster RTL put the AFD at 26% ahead of the ruling, Christian Democrats at 24%. This is a high watermark for the European far right, a once fringe movement who's virally anti-immigration, anti-Islam, and culture war politics were shunned by the mainstream just a decade ago. Today, these parties have developed deep ties with President Donald Trump and his Republican allies, who openly cite nationalists such as Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban as inspiration on policy and tactics. And one of the reasons that I have been so intrigued by this is in part the use of far right as a kind of political slur and a way to slander what I think is probably better described as genuine concern amongst many people throughout the world. It's being manifest in these three countries and these populist movements about the relationship between what they see as their country's sovereignty and this overarching kind of global, I'll call it neoliberal agenda. So I think this kind of tactic really has to stop from, especially the intelligentsia, this kind of slandering of these populist movements as essentially far right attempts to be just politically backwards, like to just reduce it to like, these people from the fringes are taking over. Let's beware. I think we might be wise to be have a little more integrity in our questioning of what is going on with these shifts happening all throughout the world, right? I think this is really reflective of a shift in mood. Often people, especially experts, talk in these abstract terms. They talk as though countries are pieces on a board or something, that people don't have attachment sentiments to culture, history, place. That things can change due to the needs of the world. And people are pushing back on that. People are fed up. They feel, I think, that their political leaders are disinterested in representing them, and more interested in advancing some larger agenda, something else. And they're trying to take control back. They're trying to take control of their countries back, is what I think. And I think that does have to be guided in a right direction. And if we continue to just deride people for having this sentiment, these are far right extremists, they should be banned from the center of the public sphere, we're going to foster the worst elements of that agenda, right? So I think we need to embrace it. I think there's a lot of stuff to be taken away from this shift here, in European politics, but global politics writ large. It's happening in Africa, it's happening in Asia, it's happening in the Americas. So what is driving that? I think we ought not be so dismissive as to just kind of use the far right as a tool to slander these movements and kind of suggest they are bad and should be detested and suppressed, because that seems to be often the response, especially from the more progressive governments, from those more aligned with, I'll call it, that kind of neoliberal agenda. Their response seems to be, well, we just have to remove this from the room. Like, we won't deal with it. We will treat it as though it is, kind of overt white supremacy, that it is something that's intolerable. These are discussions that can't be had in good faith. And so we won't have them at all. I think that's a mistake. But anyway, let me not get on my soapbox. What is interesting here is that for the first time in history, for the first time in modern history, modern history, recent history, we see a kind of populist agenda really sweeping across Europe, really taking hold. They won't be able to govern, like these various populist parties in their respective countries, coalitional governments and so on. So it's not that they will, have kind of take over these countries and implement their will, but rather I think it reflects, their popularity reflects something that's changing. Something significant that's changing about people's sentiment regarding populist politics and so on. All right, cool. We'll go on to our next story. We'll move it down a level and talk a little bit about the United States. And we'll talk about the debt. Jesus Christ. The debt has hit 37 trillion. Let's read this headline. Here we have it from the Independent. The national debt has reached a record 37 trillion, the Treasury Department reports. Okay, so what does that even mean? What are we saying? The U.S. government's gross national debt has climbed to $37 trillion as a result of increased borrowing from Donald Trump's administration, according to the latest report from the Treasury Department. The departmental update issued to track the nation's finances blamed the milestone on the accelerating pace of borrowing by the federal government, which has seen the debt soar by $1 trillion to its present record high in just 9 months. Okay, so reckless spending has got to stop. This is, if you recall, the big fight between Trump and Musk around, like, I thought we were, Musk was very adamant that he was of the mind that Trump was on the same bandwagon as him, that the spending has got to stop. Because the spending is going to cause irreparable fiscal harm, right? Because as much as in this country we like to pretend fiscal responsibility is beyond us, is we're above that, it's a thing. It does matter. It does matter that our debt is ballooning, that we won't be able to afford the interest payments on the debt. These decisions have consequences. We can't just pretend our way out of real economic fiscal constraints. I think this is a little bit of a sleight of hand by the Independent. There's good reason to be critical of Trump and his big, beautiful bill. That's not lost on me. However, and at the same time, it is important to note that it wasn't Trump. Like, this is a ideological governance problem. The American federal government, no matter who is in charge, has seemed to behave as though they have no fiscal constraints. That doesn't mean anything to them. They just keep borrowing more and more and more. Eventually, you got to pay the piper, right? Is my fear. That's my fear. That like many empires before, you can't just spend your way. You can. You shouldn't spend your way into oblivion, but you can. And I'm increasingly worried that that is the path of my own country, the American Republic, is headed down. That we're over leveraged. There's no returning home. We're just going to, kind of sing as the Titanic sinks because no one knows what to do. No one knows how to really touch the debt in a meaningful way. And so here's what we're left with. We're left with a $37 trillion gross national debt and no meaningful path to reduce it. But anyway, that's what's going on. Treasury has pointed this out to us. Really worth noting, worth thinking about as an American citizen. How might you respond politically? What can you do to put pressure on political actors to behave more responsibly? And how do we move forward? Because the other thing is like, how do you stop the spending? Right? We're committed to things. Some of these things are like social goods. Do we stop feeding people? Well, probably not. Can we afford to just turn off the military industrial complex? Probably not. So it's worth thinking about as a citizen, how who in turning to people who has plans, who can stand up and say, I can actually deal with this debt in a way that won't devastate the country. I have like one fly that will not go away. But yeah, so we need leadership that is not pretending like this problem doesn't exist, does not want to solve the problem by simply causing mass suffering, and is willing to address us and the debt in a meaningful way. I think that's Alan's point of view, as it were. Nonetheless, the debt has hit a new record high. We'll see what that means for us going forward. And shout out to the Independent here. Let's see what we have next. Arkansas is going to implement its transgender ban. Arkansas, as we have, what do we have this from? The Arkansas Times. Arkansas ban on gender affirming care for transgender minors to take effect. Let's see what we have. A federal appeals court opened the door for Arkansas's ban on gender affirming medical care for transgender youth to take full effect with Tuesday's decision, reversing what had been a 4-year hold on the first state law of its kind. Arkansas became the first state to ban hormone therapy and puberty blockers for people under the age of 18 in 2021, when a supermajority Republican legislature passed the controversial ban. Lawmakers pushed it into law despite an unlikely veto from then Governor Asa Hutchinson, a conservative who said the law was well-intended but misguided and let the state override patients, parents, and healthcare experts. Okay. Well, here we are. Arkansas has seen relief from a federal court. The federal court seemed to lean on some recent Supreme Court rulings involved in Tennessee's case, where Tennessee also moved to ban gender affirming care for minors. Tennessee got the go-ahead from the Supreme Court, and this provides, precedent for others to make similar maneuvers, where previously it was a little bit unclear if this was lawful. Could the state governments ban this type of care? Well, it turns out they can, at least as of now. President says that they can. Precedent says has determined or is on their side. I'll just leave it there. And Arkansas is following suit. Yesterday, I think we talked about something in Oklahoma, a kind of similar move to begin to ban this type of care for minors. I stand in the same position I stood then. I'm quite nervous about speaking on the topic. However, I skew towards federalism almost always. I'm not sure. Let me just stop. That's what's going on in Arkansas, and so we'll see how this affects people. People have concerns that this will be harmful. Some are great proponents of it. I am kind of happy to see the federal experiment take place, with some states doubling down on this care. The more progressive states really being adamant and even increasing their affirmation that this care is accessible, and sometimes even publicly funding it. And other states saying outright no, there will be no gender affirming care here in Arkansas, in Oklahoma, in Tennessee, or what have you. We'll see the outcomes. Unfortunately, we're running human experiments, so we would hate to see anyone harmed as we figure out what best practice should look like. But that's what's going on. That's what we got going on down there in Arkansas. And we'll get to our final story of the day, the Big Four. Dallas. Shout out to Dallas. South Dallas swag, all that. So Dallas is going to pause. Let me just read that line. Dallas pauses DEI program to protect over $300 million in federal funding. The city of Dallas is at risk of losing $305 million in federal funding if it does not comply with the Trump administration's directive to end DEI programs. The Dallas City Council has voted to pause its DEI programs while the city manager works on alternative measures for awarding contracts and funds. Community advocates are urging the city to prioritize diversity despite the federal directive and the potential loss of funding. So I kind of have a controversial opinion in relation to the DEI stuff. I'm with the administration. I really do think, I think it's well intended. So I'm not anti it as a kind of slander position against ensuring or promoting the idea that we ought to not be so comfortable with outcomes that reflect systematic exclusion and historical discrimination and so on. Like, yeah, there's definitely something to be said about the fact that some people have gotten to, does say some people experience undue burdens in trying to accomplish things. And some of those burdens are due to historical injustices. And so there's a problem there. That's not good. Something has to be done. However, I am very reticent to allow governments to discriminate without just cause at all. I think it's very dangerous. And I think we can look back at history and say, like, yeah, it's just a kind of principled take. Governments really ought not discriminate. We have something, the strict scrutiny, where we can look at it and go, we have to have really, really compelling reasons to discriminate, especially on these grounds, protected classes, things, gender, race, creed, national origin. Like, you better have a great reason if you're going about discriminating on those grounds. And historical injustice, as the Supreme Court has decided over and over and over again, is not one of those reasons. It's not compelling enough. And I quasi agree. Like, I get it. And because I'm so hesitant to even go down that road, to open that door to that type of jockeying, that type of, that type of politic, I say, I generally side on it. We can't do it. We have to figure out some other way. And that's not to say we shouldn't address and attack historical injustice. It's to say we can't use the government to do it. We have to figure out another way, right? I once had a professor that said something that's always stuck with me. He was like, you can think of constitutional limits as taking options off the table, right? So there's some things we can't do. We want to fix the problem, but we can't, for instance, silence speech. We want to fix the problem, but we can't just take people's arms away, right? The right to bear arms. Can't take people's weapons away. We want to fix the problem, but we can't just be like, well, the government gives the contract to the black union workers or to the black carpenters. That won't be a solution. We'll have to figure something else out. And we do need to figure something else out. And I also think it's really smart for Dallas to just deal with this blowback. There's going to be this like, oh, so you're kowtowing to the authoritarian dictator who hates black people. Just deal with it, because it'll go away. Keep the $300 million, fix the roads, right? And carry on with city governance. That's not, the city government has kind of a specific mandate. Go do those things. And deal with it, and politically deal with the blowback. The people overall will be better served to have the $300 million in grants to like do public housing and make sure the roads work in the long, I think. And this fight with the federal government isn't worth having. Let Alan tell it. So that's what's going on in Dallas. They went ahead and rolled back their DEI programs. Let me know what you think. Check out the Substack. That really is the heart of the thing. If you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe, Rumble, and so on. The link to the Substack is below in the description. As always, have a good rest of your day, and do your best to be difficult to conquer. That is the mission here. We want to be informed. We want to be aware. I don't want to tell you what to think, but I want to provoke a discussion. So you all have a good rest of your day. See you all tomorrow.